When police entered apartment 213 in Milwaukee, they expected a noise complaint. What they found instead was beyond imagination. Inside the refrigerator, a human head. In the freezer, a heart, and scattered across the bedroom, photos of dismembered bodies, carefully arranged. But the most disturbing thing wasn't what they found. It was him, sitting quietly on the couch.com/polite, as if this was all completely normal. That man was Jeffrey Dahmer. Between 1978 and 1991, he murdered 17 young men, keeping some parts of them close, as if refusing to let go. To the world, he was a quiet factory worker. To his victims, he was the last face they ever saw. And the question everyone still asks, how can someone look so ordinary and hide so much darkness? Because Dahmer wasn't just a killer. He was a man obsessed with control, with loneliness, with a terrifying idea of keeping love forever, even if it meant destroying it. We'll go inside his world, his childhood, his first crimes, the apartment of horrors, and the twisted mind behind it all. So stay till the end, because what made Jeffrey Dahmer truly terrifying wasn't just what he did, but why he did it. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. From the beginning, something about him seemed off. Not in a way anyone could define, but in the quiet, detached way he looked at the world. His father, Lionel Dahmer, was a chemist, logical, disciplined, and often absent. His mother, Joyce, was emotionally unstable, suffering from anxiety and depression. Their marriage was a battlefield of shouting matches and silence, and Jeffrey was caught in the middle of it all. As a child, Dahmer was shy, quiet, and oddly fascinated by things that made others uncomfortable. While most kids were playing ball outside, Jeffrey was collecting animal bones. He would find roadkill, dissect it, and keep the skeletons. When his father discovered this, he thought it was a sign of scientific curiosity, a boy following in his father's footsteps. But it was something darker. Jeffrey didn't study death. Admired Italiano. He said the sound of bones clicking together felt satisfying. In school, he was distant, awkward, and invisible. Teachers described him as polite but emotionless, like a kid walking through life without ever feeling part of it. When his parents' fights worsened, Jeffrey withdrew even further. By the time they divorced, he had already started drinking heavily. Beer in the mornings, liquor hidden in lockers. He was a teenager drowning in silence, using alcohol to kill whatever thoughts haunted him. He began to fantasize about control, about people who couldn't leave him. In his mind, relationships were temporary, but death made everything permanent. That is when the seed was planted, the belief that affection and control could only coexist through possession. It was never about hate or revenge. It was about loneliness, twisted into obsession. By high school, his classmates noticed he often acted out bizarre scenes, pretending to have seizures or speaking nonsense to make others laugh. They kajedit, duinadama. No one knew it was a mask, a way to hide the darkness that had already started to grow inside. Behind that hollow smile, he was fantasizing about what it would feel like to have someone completely under his control, motionless, obedient, forever his. When his parents finally separated, his world completely shattered. The home he grew up in became a place of abandonment. His mother took his younger brother and left. His father moved out shortly after. Jeffrey was 18 alone, lost, and spiraling into the kind of isolation that creates monsters. There was no one to notice how far gone he was, no one to see what he was becoming. He started wandering the streets, drunk and detached, his mind looping over one recurring thought. What if someone could stay forever? What if he didn't have to lose anyone again? That thought became his comfort, his addiction, his escape. And soon, it would become his reality. Because just weeks after being left completely alone, Jeffrey Dahmer would pick up a hitchhiker, and the quiet fascination with death would finally come to life. It was the summer of 1978. Hot, quiet, and heavy with that strange loneliness that only follows the end of something. Jeffrey Dahmer had just graduated high school. His mother and brother had moved away. His father had removed the house, that old Creek Inn family home, was empty, and for the first time, Dahmer was completely alone. Then came Stephen Hicks, a 19-year-old hitchhiker on his way to a concert. Normal, friendly, just another face on the road. Dahmer saw him walking and pulled over, offering him a ride. They drove to Dahmer's house. He said they could drink a few beers, hang out for a bit. Nothing unusual. But when Hicks said he wanted to leave, something inside Jeffrey cracked. The thought of being left alone again, of the silence returning, was unbearable. He picked up a 10-pound dumbbell and struck Hicks on the head. When he fell, Dahmer strangled him to death, and when it was over, he sat there for hours beside the body, drinking beer, staring at what he'd done. He later said, "I didn't want him to leave." That night, Dahmer dismembered the body, methodically cutting it apart. He buried the remains in the backyard, the same yard where he used to dissect small animals. A full circle of twisted curiosity. He crushed the bones, scattered them through the woods, and walked away like nothing had happened. The world kept spinning. Jeffrey Dahmer became invisible again. For nearly a decade after that first murder, Dahmer seemed to vanish. He enrolled in college but dropped out. He joined the army but was discharged due to heavy drinking. He lived quietly, drifting from place to place, pretending to be normal. But deep down that night with Stephen Hicks had changed something permanent. He had felt power, and more dangerously, peace. He told investigators later, after that first time it became an obsession. But it wasn't about blood or pain, it was about control. About freezing a moment before it slipped away. Hicks was his first experiment, and in Dahmer's mind, it had worked for a little while. He wasn't alone. In the early 1980s, he moved in with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin. To the outside world, it looked like stability. He was quiet, polite, even went to church. But inside, the storm was building again. He began collecting mannequins, bringing them to his room, talking to them. The loneliness was unbearable. He wanted company, but one that would never leave, never argue, never reject him. He started visiting gay bars in Beth. At first, just to be around people. But soon, the same urge returned. The thought that if he could make someone stay, permanently, maybe the emptiness would stop. He began drugging men at the bathhouses, waiting until they were unconscious, then lying beside them motionless, silent, pretending they were together. It wasn't enough. By the late 1980s, he was ready again, not for love, but for control. And peacetime, he would take it further. The first murder had been a moment of panic. The next ones would be planned. The silence that followed Stephen Hicks was about to be broken, replaced by screams that would echo through Milwaukee for years. After the murder of Stephen Hicks, Jeffrey Dahmer drifted through life like a shadow. He wasn't yet the infamous Milwaukee Cannibal, not even close. He was just empty. A man trying to wear the skin of normalcy while something monstrous grew inside. For a while, he managed to hold it together. He joined the army, serving as a medic in Germany. But his alcoholism, his constant need to escape reality, destroyed any chance of stability. He was discharged in 1981, and from there, everything spiraled. He wandered aimlessly, drinking, sleeping in motels, getting arrested for disorderly conduct. There was no direction, no purpose, only a quiet craving he couldn't satisfy. Eventually, he moved back to Wisconsin, into his grandmother's house in West Allis. To outsiders, it seemed like a second chance. A sweet old lady, her grandson helping with chores, attending church every Sunday. But behind closed doors, her basement became a dark sanctuary, the place where Jeffrey's fantasies evolved. He began bringing men home from bars. At first, just for company. He didn't want them to leave, so he started drugging them, sleeping beside them while they were unconscious, pretending they were still with him. I just wanted to be close to them. Elateris sighed. That was the start of his new ritual control disguised as affection. When his grandmother complained about the strange smells and late-night guests, he moved into his own apartment. That's when things began to unravel completely. He was no longer hiding his urges. He was perfecting them. He bought a Polaroid camera and started photographing men he brought home, capturing them in vulnerable, submissive poses. His obsession with preservation and control deepened. In 1987, Dahmer met Stephen Twomey at a bar. They drank, went back to a hotel, and the next thing Dahmer remembered was waking up beside a lifeless body. Twami's chest was sunken in. Dahmer claimed he had no memory of killing him. But once again, the same cold logic returned. He bought a suitcase, stuffed the body inside, took it to his grandmother's basement, and dismembered it piece by piece. The dismemberment didn't disturb him anymore. It fascinated him. He kept parts, disposed of others, learning what worked and what didn't. That moment reignited something dormant. He realized how easy it was to hide the truth, and how intoxicating it felt to have complete control. After Twame, the murders became more frequent. Richard Guerrero in 1988. Anthony Sears in 1989. He preserved skulls, bones, even painted them to keep as trophies. The more he killed, the more he blurred the line between life and death, love and possession. And through it all, he maintained his polite, quiet persona. His co-workers at the chocolate factory described him as odd but friendly. No one suspected that every night, he returned to a home filled with remains, human bones hidden in drawers, preserved skulls in closets, photographs of victims carefully stored like a secret gallery. His control over his victims wasn't about violence anymore. It was about freezing a moment. He wanted them to stay. Always. That desire became his obsession, and his obsession became his entire existence. By 1990, Jeffrey Dahmer moved into apartment 213 on North 25th Street, a small, ordinary unit that would soon become one of the most horrifying crime scenes in modern history. He had learned how to lure, how to hide, how to blend in, and now he was ready to create his own world, one where no one ever left him again. Apartment 213, the place that would later be described as hell hidden behind beige walls. From the outside, Jeffrey Dahmer's life looked painfully ordinary. He had a job at the Ambrosia chocolate factory, paid rent on time, and occasionally chatted with neighbors. But the moment his apartment door closed, the mask came off. What he built inside those walls was a nightmare no one could have imagined. It began in 1990, shortly after he moved into his new place on North 25th Street. Freedom from his grandmother's house meant freedom to do whatever he wanted. And what he wanted. Wash. Control. His new hunting ground became Milwaukee's gay bars. He'd sit alone, quiet, polite, then strike up conversations with young men. He offered them money to take photos, sometimes for modeling, sometimes just to hang out. Most agreed they saw a shy, harmless guy offering a few quick dollars. None of them knew they were walking straight into the last moments of their lives. Once inside, Dahmer would drug their drinks with sleeping pills. He waited until they lost consciousness, then strangled them. No screaming, no struggle, just silence. Afterward, he'd lie beside the body, sometimes talking to it as if it were still alive. For him, it wasn't rage or hatred. It was the unbearable fear of being alone. Between 1990 and 1991, Dahmer perfected his routine. He photographed his victims at every stage, alive, dead, and he kept skulls as trophies, bleached bones, stored hearts and organs in the fridge, and dissolved flesh in acid. His goal was to create what he called a permanent companion. He wanted to build something that wouldn't leave him a living, breathing zombie under his control. One of his most disturbing experiments involved drilling holes into victims' skulls and pouring acid inside. An attempt to destroy consciousness while keeping the body alive. Some victims even woke up briefly, unaware of what was happening, but none survived for long. To Dahmer, this wasn't about sadism. It was about possession. He wanted to own people completely, to trap love itself. His neighbors began to complain about the smell, the rotting meat, as he called it. One woman, Glenda Cleveland, even called the police multiple times. But every time officers showed up, Dahmer calmly explained it away. Just spoiled food, he'd say, with a shy smile. They believed him a clean-cut, polite white man in an otherwise poor, black neighborhood. That trust cost lives. One night, a teenage boy named Conorak Synthesymphone stumbled out of Dahmer's apartment, naked, bruised, dazed. Neighbors tried to help, but when police arrived, Dahmer convinced them the boy was his 19-year-old lover, just drunk after a fight. The officers laughed, escorted the boy back to Dahmer's door, and left him there. Hours later, Conorak was dead. That moment showed the world how close Dahmer had been to being caught, and how his calm, manipulative charm fooled everyone. The horror continued. Victims disappeared one after another, each one carefully documented in his growing photo collection, his trophies of control. By mid-1991, the stench grew unbearable. Neighbors joked about it, unaware they were living next to a cannibal. Inside, the fridge held human heads, the freezer, hearts and muscles. His bedroom contained 57 Polaroids of mutilated bodies. And through it all, Dahmer went to work each morning like nothing happened. He once told investigators, "I was building my own private world, my own museum of memories." That museum would finally collapse one night when one of his intended victims did something no one else had done before. Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't like most killers. There was no thrill in the chase, no adrenaline rush from the act itself. His killings came from something deeper, something colder. He wasn't driven by anger or hatred. He was driven by fear, the fear of being abandoned. Every murder he committed was his twisted way of stopping time, of keeping someone with him forever. When psychologists later interviewed Dahmer, he didn't fit into the usual categories. He wasn't impulsive like Richard Ramirez or sadistic like Ted Bundy. Dahmer's voice stayed calm, polite, almost apologetic, but the words that came out of his mouth were pure horror. "I wanted them to stay with me," I sighed softly. "That's why I killed them. Not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them." His victims were usually young men, often people of color, often from poor backgrounds. They were easy to overlook, even easier to forget, and that's exactly how Dahmer was able to keep killing without suspicion. But when you look closely, you start to see the pattern. He wasn't choosing victims randomly. He was selecting people who, like him, seemed lost, lonely, out of place. In some twisted way, he saw himself in them. He didn't kill out of rage. There was no shouting, no fight, just quiet, planned control. He would drug his victims, strangle them, and then try to preserve their bodies, keeping skulls, organs, and even skin. Some nights Eddie sit beside the remains, talking to them, playing with their hair, watching TV. To him, they were still there. One of the most disturbing things Dahmer admitted was his attempt to create obedient zombies. He said he didn't want to hurt them, he just didn't want them to leave. He injected acid into their skulls to destroy their will but keep their body alive. "If I could make them stay," he said, "I wouldn't have to kill them." That line, "I wouldn't have to kill them," perfectly sums up Dahmer as psychology. He wasn't seeking violence. He was trying to eliminate rejection, even if it meant destroying a person to achieve it. Experts later said Dahmer's crimes weren't about dominance or anger. They were about ownership, total, permanent control. In contrast, killers like Ted Bundy sought power and admiration. Bundy killed to feel superior. Dahmer killed to feel less alone. And that's what makes him terrifying on a different level. Because his motive wasn't just evil, it was human in its root. A desperate need for connection, twisted into something monstrous. When you listen to Dahmer's interviews, he sounds disturbingly normal. He speaks softly, never raises his voice. You could almost mistake him for an average man talking about his day. But behind that calm tone was a man whose idea of love had rotted into obsession. Clinical psychologists who studied him said Dahmer's crimes were a rare combination of necrophilia, cannibalism, and delusional attachment, all feeding into his obsession with control. He didn't want living partners. He wanted possessions, silent, obedient, forever his. Even his cannibalism wasn't about hunger. He said it made him feel like his victims became part of him, like he was keeping them close, in the only way he knew how. To him, it was love turned inside out. When people called him a monster, Dahmer simply replied, "I understand that, but I didn't set out to be one." And that's what chills you to the bone. How rational he sounded explaining the irrational. How human he seemed describing the inhuman. Because Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't the kind of monster hiding in the dark. He was the quiet man next door, polite, gentle, and lonely, building his kingdom of death one night at a time. By 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer's world was crumbling. Though on the surface, everything looked the same. He still worked at the Ambrosia chocolate factory, still kept to himself, still smiled politely to neighbors. But behind that thin mask, his apartment had become a tomb. The smell of decay filled the hallways, yet no one truly believed what was happening inside. It all changed one night, July 22nd, 1991. It started like so many of Dahmer's nights. A drink, a smile, and an invitation back to his apartment. His target this time was a 32-year-old man named Tracy Edwards. Dahmer approached him at a bar, charming in his awkward way, offering money to pose for photos. Edwards agreed. What he didn't know was that he was walking straight into hell. Inside apartment 213, Dahmer turned on the TV. The Exorcist 3 was playing. He offered Edwards a drink, which was drugged. Then, Dahmer pulled out handcuffs, trying to lock Edwards' wrist. But something felt off this time. Maybe Dahmer was tired, sloppy, or maybe part of him wanted it all to end. Edwards resisted, pretending to stay calm, trying not to provoke him. He noticed something horrifying, a strange, rotting smell, a blue barrel in the corner, and boxers filled with what looked like photos. Dahmer's eyes were distant, unfocused. He told Edwards he was going to take control, and started mumbling about keeping him forever. Tracy Edwards, in that moment, knew his life depended on playing along. He laughed with Dahmer, acted calm, even watched TV with him, waiting for the right moment. Then, as Dahmer's attention drifted, Edwards punched him in the face and ran for his life. He sprinted through the streets, one hand still cuffed, until he found 2 police officers and begged for help. The officers followed Edwards back to Dahmer's apartment, probably expecting a domestic dispute or a misunderstanding. But the moment they stepped inside, the nightmare unfolded. The smell hit first. Then they saw the photographs, dozens of Polaroids showing mutilated bodies, dismembered limbs, and what looked like Dahmer posing beside them. One officer opened the fridge and froze. Inside, he found a human head. The freezer contained more remains. Heart's organs, flesh wrapped neatly like meat. The blue barrel in the corner was filled with acid and dissolved bones. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't fight back. He didn't scream, didn't run. He simply sighed for what I did. I should be dead. Then, calmly, he turned around and offered his wrists for the cuffs. When word spread about what was found inside that apartment, Milwaukee erupted in shock and disgust. Reporters swarmed the building. Neighbors couldn't. T believed that the quiet man who offered them sandwiches and smiled in the hallway had been living surrounded by death. Inside the police interrogation room, Dahmer spoke with the same quiet politeness. He confessed to everything, 17 murders in total. He described each one with chilling detail, showing no anger, no joy, just a detached honesty. He told police he never wanted his victims to suffer. He only wanted them to stay. It wasn't hate, he said. I wanted them to be a part of me. That's why I kept them. As investigators pieced together the horrors, they realized how many warning signs had been missed. How close police had come to catching him before. Just a year earlier, Dahmer had lured a 14-year-old boy who escaped, but was returned to Dahmer by officers. After he convinced them it was a lover-esque quarrel, the boy was dead within minutes of their departure. If not for Tracy Edwards' escape, Dahmer might have continued his quiet killing spree for years. And maybe that is the most haunting part. That his end didn't come from police work or investigation. It came from one man's courage to run. One moment of luck. One final chance at freedom. Because inside that small, decaying apartment, Jeffrey Dahmer's darkness had finally met its breaking point. When Jeffrey Dahmer sat down in the interrogation room after his arrest, there was no struggle, no denial, just silence. The officers expected lies, resistance, maybe fear, but Dahmer looked at them calmly and said, "I'll tell you everything." And he did. 4 hours, then days, Dahmer spoke with an unnerving calm, describing each murder in chilling detail. He didn't hesitate, didn't try to justify. He listed names, dates, and the things he had done as though he were describing his daily routine. Police recorded every word, struggling to comprehend the horror behind his steady voice. He talked about his first victim, Stephen Hicks, and how it felt right to keep him from leaving. Then the second, Stephen Twomey. Dahmer said he didn't even remember killing him, only waking up beside the dead body. One by one, he recounted the others. 17 in total. He remembered the smells, The steps, the moments of silence before and after. It was all there in his mind, catalogued like a collection. But the strangest thing was how he spoke. Dahmer wasn't angry, proud, or he was polite, almost gentle. When detectives asked why he kept the remains, he said quietly, "I wanted to keep a part of them with me. I didn't want them to leave." He admitted to taking photos of his victims, not for cruelty, but to remember them. He described how he'd boil skulls to preserve them, and how he tried to build a kind of shrine with bones and lamps a temper. He called it to feel surrounded by the people he couldn't let go of. When police asked why he ate parts of his victims, his answer was chillingly simple. "I wanted them to be a part of me. Forever." There was no laughter, no madness in his tone, just a quiet obsession. A man who wanted control, permanence, and connection in the most horrific way imaginable. The investigators, hardened by years of experience, were visibly shaken. Some had to leave the room. Even the most seasoned homicide detectives said they had never encountered someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, a killer who seemed to hate his victims, but couldn't bear to lose them. Psychologists who later interviewed him called him lucid but emotionally hollow. He wasn't insane in the traditional sense. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but his mind was consumed by an emptiness that no normal human connection could fill. And perhaps the most haunting part of his confession was how ordinary he sounded. He used words like lonely, curious, compulsive. He never tried to shock or impress. It was as if the horrors he described were his version of truth, the truth he'd carried alone for years. In one interview, Dahmer said, "I didn't want to hurt them. I just wanted them to stay." But it never worked. So I tried again, and again. The media went into a frenzy when the details leaked: human remains found in his refrigerator, skulls on the shelves, Polaroids in drawers. People couldn't believe this quiet, awkward man had been living in a small apartment filled with death. Dahmer's family was devastated. His father, Lyanna, later said, "I still love my son, but I will never understand him." His mother suffered a breakdown. The victims' families demanded justice, struggling to comprehend the brutality and the seeming normalcy of the man responsible. And yet, Dahmer's calm demeanor continued. He didn't plead innocence or insanity right away. He simply said he wanted it to stop, that his arrest was a relief. "It's over," he told detectives. "I couldn't stop myself. Now, it's over." But was it really over? Or had his crimes exposed something deeper, a darkness in human nature that no prison bars could ever contain? In January 1992, the world turned its eyes to Milwaukee. The courtroom was packed. Survivors, reporters, psychologists, and families of the 17 men who never came home. And in the center of it all sat Jeffrey Dahmer, dressed neatly in khaki and glasses, his face blank. No rage, no tears, just stillness. The prosecution laid out the horrors in brutal detail. Skulls in the freezer, photographs of corpses, body parts preserved in acid. Every word felt like a punch, but Dahmer didn't flinch. He listened, hands folded, like a man attending a lecture about someone else's life. His lawyers didn't deny what he had done. How could they? There was overwhelming evidence, and Dahmer's own confession. Instead, they argued insanity. They said he wasn't in control, that his obsessions had taken over his mind. His attorney described him as a man trapped in a nightmare of his own making. But prosecutors had another view. They said Dahmer was perfectly sane, that he planned each murder, bought tools, lured victims, hid evidence. He knew right from wrong. This wasn't madness. It was control, obsession, and choice. Then came Dahmer's own words. In a quiet, emotionless voice, he said, "I knew I was sick, or evil, or both. I tried to fight it, but I couldn't stop." He admitted that he deserved punishment, that death might even be a mercy. For weeks, the court replayed the details. Families cried as they heard how their loved ones died. Some couldn't bear to look at him. Others stared with fury, as if searching for a flicker of remorse behind those glasses. But Dahmer remained calm. The only time his voice shook was when he spoke directly to the court. "I never wanted freedom after this," he said. "I deserve whatever I get for what I've done. I know my time in prison will be long. I asked for no consideration." On February 17, 1992, the judge delivered the verdict. Guilty on 15 counts of murder, he was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms. 957 years in prison. There was no applause, no satisfaction. Only a heavy silence. Justice was served, but it could never bring the victims back. Inside the prison, Dahmer was kept isolated at first, but even there, his strange calm continued. He spent time reading the Bible, talking to pastors, and claimed he had found God. He even got baptized in 1994. Some said he had changed, that he was seeking forgiveness. Others said it was another way for him to control the narrative, to appear repentant in the public eye. He received letters from fans, reporters, even admirers. The media turned him into a morbid fascination. True crime magazines called him the Milwaukee Cannibal. Movies and books were already in production. Jeffrey Dahmer had become a cultural figure, both feared and obsessed over. But inside those prison walls, not everyone was captivated. Fellow inmates saw him as a monster. Some said Dahmer joked about his crimes, shaping food into body parts to mock others. Whether true or not, it sealed his fate. On the morning of November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer was assigned to clean a bathroom area with 2 other inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scott. The guards left them unsupervised for 20 minutes. When they returned, Dahmer was found on the floor, his head crushed with a metal bar. He was pronounced dead at 34 years old. The man who wanted to control life and death had finally lost both. His killer, Christopher Scott, later said he acted because God told him to, that Dahmer crossed a line that couldn't be forgiven. And in a dark, almost poetic way, Dahmer's story ended not with justice, but with chaos. The very thing he feared most. Even after his death, Jeffrey Dahmer's story refused to die. His name still echoes in documentaries, classrooms, and nightmares. To some, he's the face of pure evil. To others, he's the perfect study of a broken human mind, a man consumed by emptiness and obsession until it became his identity. Dahmer's crimes forced society to confront questions most people never want to ask. Was he born a monster, or created by loneliness, neglect, and a need for control? He didn't kill out of rage. He didn't chase fame. He killed to keep something to stop people from leaving. He wanted love that could never leave his side. And when reality couldn't give it to him, he created it through death. Even in his calmest moments, there was something chilling about him. In interviews, he spoke softly, with perfect manners, describing horrors that made detectives sick. That contrasts the politeness of a man who ate human flesh is what made Jeffrey Dahmer unforgettable. His story exposed the cracks in the system, too. Police had visited his apartment more than once, even returned an escaped drugged victim to him, believing it was a domestic issue. That boy, Conorak Synthesymphone, was murdered shortly after. Dahmer's case revealed how negligence, racism, and disbelief can let monsters thrive in plain sight. And in pop culture, his image grew beyond control. Movies, TV shows, even memes, turning his crimes into stories, his interviews into sound bites. The Netflix series decades later drew millions of views, reigniting the same question. Why are people still fascinated by him? The answer might be unsettling because Dahmer wasn't the shadowy figure hiding in alleys. He was the quiet neighbor, the guy who waved hello in the hallway, who worked a normal job, and lived alone in a small apartment. He showed us that true horror doesn't always come with a scream. Sometimes it smiles, speaks politely, and offers you a drink. His death in prison felt symbolic. The man who sought control met a violent, unpredictable end. The chaos he spent his life trying to contain finally found him. And yet, even in death, he became something he never expected, a symbol of human darkness that still draws curiosity, fear, and reflection. Psychologists still debate him. Was he a sociopath? A necrophile? A man destroyed by trauma? Or was he simply proof that the human mind can break in ways too terrifying to fully understand? Whatever the answer, Jeffrey Dahmer remains a mirror, we're afraid to look into. Because in his story, we see not just the monster, but the fragility of what makes us human. He didn't just kill his victims. If Frostheim tried to earn affection, and in doing so, became a man who destroyed everything he ever wanted to keep. And that's why, decades later, his name still lingers. Not as a legend, but as a warning. The scariest monsters aren't born in darkness. They're made in loneliness, and they live among us. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of real-life monsters, because sometimes the most horrifying truths are the ones that sound the most human.